The class of the most essential matters of which we are called upon to deal is not so simple to indicate. We look at an expressionistic account of the rivalry of the global or world system on an analogy with a supposed rivalry between Mr. Alexander Dugin and Mr. Ignativ, the Canadian worker of Mr. Soros, who has been removed not so long ago from an Eastern European country, along with the university to which he represented. So this is a species of the difficulty of any supposed account, which is the right account for anyone and everyone. It's that as soon as it's not that we can look and see, here we have a private individual who set up a university, and we look and we see that most powerful universities in the world producing all kinds of racist notions of historiography, how history should be done, and in other words, how human beings should remember their past, and other subject matter, that these are private institutions, most of them, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. I'm not sure of the status of the London School of Economics. Oxford and Cambridge, I believe, are basically property. That would be an interesting legal question. Maybe there's some vestigial clauses in place. Probably has been cleared up, but perhaps they're actually somehow autonomous zones set up by some former monarch, or who knows what whether they're private or positively belonging to the UK or not. I don't know. But it's not the question of these so-called, by Mr. Ignativ, the so-called anti-majoritarian institutions, which actually means authoritarian institutions. So in other words, anyone who wants to know what the deal is in their country learns that by going to certain institutions, such as a law school in America. That's often the road to trying to find out what the political deal is, and if you're going to go along with the current tide and crash against the stones and see the refraction patterns according to the current tide, rather than attempting to stand back and think about the situation. Then there's certain avenues that you go through to learn that, and they're mostly private institutions. So the fact that a billionaire, not even only a billionaire, but I think even Steve Bannon was trying to found a university. Trump had, of course, the pseudo academy university. If the institutions that guide and lead the activity of human beings, so far as it's produced from autonomous action and not due to forced circumstances, luck, and other things. If the institution's supposed to be giving us guidance about the good life, can crop up out of specific interests of specific individuals who may then, one can see at least that we have a kind of partisan problem here. It's not obvious who really is the best here. So when we go to the, let's say Ignativ becomes instead Francis Fukuyama, when Fukuyama sets forth his version of a pluralistic democratic liberalism, he doesn't do it while thinking also of the notion of anthropology, which where Dugin thinks of the people from, the ethnos. He rather does it, especially through this example of religious toleration during the period of the Dutch Golden Age. So the Dutch became wealthy through practicing this toleration in the wake of the Reformation, in the wake of Calvin promoting these various, or the theologian of, Calvin promoting these various pro-business policies in, I think it was in the Free State of Geneva, or maybe it only became that later when Rousseau was around. But in any case, these transformed doctrine produced a certain being, and a number of questions arise. For instance, have we been producing a comfortable situation where once somebody turns, as it were, becomes part of that culture, they like it enough that they're kind of like they're repulsed by other ways of doing things. So it's sort of like you have a guy that's doing some intense physical labor, maybe construction work or something, and then he becomes instead the guy in the trailer office by himself, looking at papers and stuff all day. And then you say, you show him the what he used to be doing, and it doesn't appeal to him anymore because he's gotten used to his new situation in the meantime. Something like that. It's clear that there would be partisan issues, biases involved, and one can't really say straightforwardly which is better. So I think we have a direct issue here where Fukuyama doesn't see the cultural level, he sees the social level at which this tolerance happens, in something like the way with the recent Supreme Court cases about what the protection of that cake case and some other things, what the two statements about the religion and the two clauses in the Constitution mean, for instance. This kind of toleration, the so-called divide between church and state, is not really a cultural issue. So let's try to make some bare way to understand what we mean by cultural. So one way which has become sort of generic in the last since when maybe since about World War II era, I guess, this notion of psychology as about the individual. Psychology used to mean about the psyche, which meant about the Greek psyche, which meant about the soul. But psychology rather as experimental, not just experimental, but as just about something which stood in contradistinction to society, so that there's a person, and say that person is, for instance, a pacifist. So the person's a pacifist, and then that's their inclination on their own. This is the personal psychology is supposed to deal with this one person, but then they're in this system where they know that they have to respond to all these notions of heroism, or that they could arouse a great animus from their fellows if they would announce themselves as a pacifist. So you had that think some World War One era films. I think Gary Cooper was in one of them about probably a Quaker pacifist in World War One. This shows a struggle between the psychological level and the social level. That's exactly what that shows. But the level that Fukuyama never considers is the level of how it was that certain issues take on this strong emotional tenor where they determine this struggle between the social level and the individual level. So then you could have an example. I want to jump to it. Maybe it's slightly expressionistic, but the Hindu, for instance. Why is there all this thought cathected into and somatically lived of this reincarnation theory? So, but it's not really a theory if you're really living your whole life according as though it were so. In fact, you're just treating it in the same way the Westerners treat questions, the facticity, which is to say the truth is veracity, that you really live in it and you observe it. Facticity of that we experience ourselves as having some kind of freedom, and then we blame ourselves sometimes for doing something wrong. We praise ourselves for doing right. We have some kind of freedom. We experience ourselves that way. Then the West goes back and forth between how much autonomy, how much freedom is going on in a human being, etc., etc. You could see the same kind of notion, which would be put down as religious in some sense, in some views, in some historiographies, and some theories of how memory should be represented, of how history should be represented, of how investigation is happening, is put down. So if one has these complex organs, living organs of something like religion, something like occupation, what one does with one's day, race or identity, that which goes along with nationhood, language, one's language, war and peace, status in war and peace. If you start with some criteria like this, and then you try to produce a universalism of some kind, so this is like one of Alain de Benoit, Dugin's ally, touches on when he's saying, aside from the so-called universal code of human rights produced with Roosevelt at the end of the war, there's also some other people that produced statements of so-called universal human rights. The Islamic statement, the Kenya statement, I think it is also. This kind of complex living organs, as it were, is surely open to some negotiation. So this is what Dugin's saying at this level of, for instance, why, if people say animals have many emotions, as many as human beings, but they simply have no mode of expressing it, why do these same people have no indignation over the suffering of animals? Whereas the Hindu doesn't have an indignation against it. They just say it's wrong. It's not like a moral thing. It's just a fact. They consider it to be wrong. It should be avoided, like any pain. But so why does this, in certain cultures, have no status? There's no social struggle about it, except that maybe at the very fringes in our own time with some, some radical vegan army or whatever, 9 monkeys, or however. But on the whole, why does that have so little status in one spot, and then some other matters, whether one wears a red Magna hat or something, have such a huge, triggering effect? So it's, you remember that thing with the Trump spokeswoman, what was her name, Sarah something or another, being kicked out of that restaurant because they wouldn't serve someone who was part of the Trump administration. So this kind of thing, this question of why certain things become fought over in a very treacherous manner in this between societies and individuals seems to be a liminal element of any society, as these cultural positionings of the issues which are trigger people, like in the Vietnam War, like a crew cut or something, like a short haircut versus long hair would be more important than napalm or not napalming a village. It would get you more upset that somebody had the long hair than that they had napalmed the village. So why are these different cultural trigger points? The why doesn't really matter. It only matters here that it does matter, but I'm saying just for this discussion between Fukuyama and Dugin, it's just that all I'm saying is Fukuyama doesn't focus on the existence of these somewhat arbitrary whys. He only focuses on the zone which is within the dialogic of that he's used to as a Californian. So within this so-called pluralistic liberal situation, which again, it's not obvious that one really prefers it, except that one is usually kind of prefers whatever one is habituated dwelling has got one used to.